Hey guys, welcome back. We're on chapter 12. This is going to be video number 1, dealing with President Roosevelt and his plan to help out the Great Depression, something known as the New Deal. But before we get to talking about U.S. history, as always, my horrible joke. So this weekend, my wife was watching the movie Twilight, and I sat down and watched it with her for a couple of minutes, and it was that baseball scene. And you know, when I was watching it and just how hard they were hitting the baseball and how fast they were running, I was wondering, is there anything that vampires are not good at? So I go online and do some research, and the one thing that vampires really struggle with is math. And they're notoriously all bad at math, unless you count Dracula. So, as always, my horrible joke, but the reason I have to keep telling these horrible jokes is you guys aren't coming up with better ones for me to tell. So, you have to bear with me and the horrible jokes that I come up with. So, first talking about Franklin Roosevelt and a little bit about his backstory before we really get to the New Deal, really the bulk of what we remember him for. So, President Franklin Roosevelt, he was a distant cousin of Teddy Roosevelt, and he grew up in Hyde Park. Now, here's his house right here. And probably looking at it and saying, yeah, not bad. Probably looking at it actually thinking, man, FDR was crazy rich. Boy, were they wealthy. And that is going to be very true. But he grew up in Hyde Park, but he loved the environment. He had a lifelong goal of continuing learning. He went on to Harvard and graduated there. But in 1910 is really when he starts to gain a little bit more fame, not just being a rich kid. And in 1910, he becomes a New York State Senator. So he is going to do that for about 3 years. And after those 3 years, he steps down. And I guess you could say he steps down for good reason. He steps down because he is going to be given a promotion. And the promotion that he's going to be given is he is going to be the acting Assistant Secretary of the Navy. And he was the Assistant Secretary of the Navy during President Woodrow Wilson's term. And you're probably remembering Woodrow Wilson, there was a pretty significant event that had to deal with the Navy when he was president. World War I. I mean, think about it. This is his new position. He's the Assistant Secretary of the Navy, and he gains a lot of fame because of the war. And after the war is over, he steps down again, and probably another very famous thing that most people remember him by, he contracts polio. Now, polio, there is not a cure, and really what people know polio as is a paralyzing disease. But FDR, he's not just going to sit down and relax. He is going to keep working. He's going to work very, very hard, and eventually he runs as the vice president for the Democratic Party. Now, that fails. He does not become the vice president. But what does happen is he gains a little bit more popularity. He gains a little bit more fame. And in 1928, he runs to be the governor of New York. And the reason he runs to become the governor of New York is at that time, Al Smith, who was the current governor, he steps down so he can run to be the president. He challenges Hoover in 1928. And as we know, President Hoover wins. And again, synonymous with the Great Depression and Hoovervilles. Not a good time to be the president. But FDR, he becomes the governor of the state of New York, and once he's there, he enacts tax cuts. And this is something that, you know, we always hear politicians, and they always kind of talk about it, and they always have their finger, and they point, and they say, I guarantee I will not raise your taxes. FDR does this. He enacts tax cuts, kind of that idea of supply-side economics, and people absolutely love him. They are infatuated with his policies. He also creates public utilities programs, so something we'll talk more about with once the New Deal starts to get up and running. But the day after Roosevelt is nominated, the New Deal is going to be chosen as his campaign strategy. And just like, you know, I'm sure if we talk about different presidencies and what their strategy or what their speeches are going to be about, there's always kind of a key theme. And, you know, we think about President Trump and saying the Make America Great Again. But FDR, his was pretty simple. A New Deal. He is one of the most progressive-minded politicians, and he's not going to do the same thing that President Hoover does. He wants to make change. He's okay with raising the budget, and people are going to be on board with that. So, 1932, when he first runs for office, I'll move my picture so you can see. President Hoover tries a little bit, doesn't really campaign as much as FDR, but the people, they have spoken. They do not want the Republicans in power. They do not want Herbert Hoover in power. And as you can see in the red, this is what Herbert Hoover wins. FDR gets the rest of the country. 472 to 59 in one of the biggest landslide victories. FDR is going to win, and he is now going to become the next president. Now, with his inauguration, again, there is a major problem with the Electoral College and the presidency at this time. And that was that when Hoover lost, he is known as a lame duck, which is the actual political term. I'm not trying to have another dig at President Hoover. He's been through a lot. He doesn't need me to keep slandering his name. So President Hoover has the position, but he has it for 5 more months, even though everyone knows FDR is going to take over. And the reason that this is just looked at as so bad and so poorly timed is here you have Hoover, who wasn't really getting a lot done, wasn't really getting a lot accomplished, but he got to keep the position while FDR is kind of sitting in the background, poking and prodding him, saying, hey, do this, try that. Hoover isn't going to try any of it. So Hoover has to basically sit down and wait it out. FDR also has to wait it out until he is going to be inaugurated. Now, while he is inaugurated, there is a fear about ruining what is known as the gold standard, which means that basically all the money that we have is going to be backed by some form of gold. Now, when we do not have it backed by gold, that essentially means that the piece of paper is just paper. It doesn't have any value whatsoever. So he is really concerned with trying to make everyone understand the gold standard is not going to be ruined, and he's going to start to push governors to create a bank holiday. And a bank holiday, as the name kind of implies, the banks are just going to close. They're going to shut down. And this is just going to be a random Monday, a random Tuesday. Close the doors, declare a holiday. Why are they going to do this? When it happens, when the bank is closed, you can't withdraw your money. You can't withdraw your money. Banks can't close. This kind of mind-blowing explanation as to how to save the banks, it's going to work for a short amount of time. So these bank holidays are really just done to make sure that nobody is going to be going and doing these bank runs and allowing them to stay open. And then we get to the first New Deal. And we'll just go real quickly into a little bit about it and the 100 days. Now, Roosevelt and his advisors, they're nicknamed the Brain Trust. And here's an image on the left of one of the Brain Trusts and their meetings. Now, Roosevelt, he knew what he wanted, and he was not very patient. And I guess you could say for a good reason. And the reason that's a good thing is at this time, Hoover, he was kind of patient. He thought 60 days, this is going to be over. Our economy's strong enough to be able to live past the stock market crash and people borrowing on credit and banks closing and yada, yada, yada. But they are going to push new laws and push new legislation in very quickly. So this new group, the Brain Trust, they're going to be members of both the Republican and Democratic Party. They're going to be able to have bipartisan support, but really they're just going to come together to come up with ideas on how to fix the economy. And just to show how patient or how impatient he was, I should say, during the first 100 days, Congress passes 15 major laws. And that today is just known as the 100 days, and it still is kind of the gold standard for a president. We hear all the time about presidents and what their policies are going to be and what they're going to get accomplished. Well, if they don't make any strides towards that in the first 100 days, they're just going to kind of be laughed off. It's like they were elected kind of in a sham because they aren't actually going to do what they promised to do. So that's just to show you again just how quick things are going to start to change and how quick things are going to be geared towards a new economy. Now, back to the point of the Brain Trust. The reason he would pick people who'd argue with each other is he didn't just want people to say, yep, that's good, sign it, get it out of the way. Sign it, keep going. Because we realized that was a problem with Hoover. With the Smoot-Hawley tariff, he was afraid to go against his own Republican Party. But FDR, he wants people to fight. He wants people to have those conversations. And a lot of people kind of shy away from those types of things. President Warren Harding definitely shied away from those things. But FDR, he wants people to have that tough, difficult conversation of how to effectively fix the economy. But in the end, Roosevelt, he makes all the final decisions. And it can be something as simple as change that word here, completely scrap that law. We're done with it. It's not going to help. But he is just going to try to do as much change as possible. He's going to do it as quick as possible because America, we need the help.